We have learned how Pavlov conditioned his dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell. And we also learned about how Watson conditioned little Albert to be afraid of rats. And those are both examples of the type of learning called classical conditioning. And now we're going to talk about another type of classical conditioning, and that's called taste aversion learning. And a taste aversion is defined as a biological tendency in which an organism learns after a single experience to avoid a food if eating is followed by illness. And that's called a taste aversion. Now, I want to add, it could also be a drink. All right, so technically it's avoiding a particular food, or it could also be a beverage. All right, so this picture illustrates what I'm talking about. So in this picture, what happens is someone eats a hot dog at an amusement park. Then, right after they eat the hot dog, they go on a roller coaster. And then after they get off the roller coaster, they are now nauseous and they end up throwing up. And then what happens? Now, the next time they see a hot dog, it looks repulsive to them. Why? Because they associate this hot dog with the time that they got sick. So now when they see this hot dog, it really doesn't look too good, and they're repulsed by it, and they don't want to eat the hot dog. They don't want anything to do with the hot dog. Maybe even the smell or the sight of the hot dog makes them sick. So that's an example of what we call a taste aversion. Now, this is one way that a taste aversion could happen. Um, a really common way that taste aversions occur is through food poisoning. So a person eats a particular food that is contaminated, and then a little while later, they become physically ill, and they know, oh, it must have been that bad shrimp I ate at the party or something like that. And so they associate the illness with eating the contaminated food, and now they want nothing to do with that food for a very long time. So taste aversions, sometimes they're very powerful, sometimes they can last forever, or sometimes they just last for a very long time. In my old psychology book, I remember the author gave a personal example. And he said that when he was a kid, his brother dared him to eat, 3 huge uh, buckets of popcorn at the movie theater. And so he did that. He took the dare, and he just binged on this movie theater popcorn. And then, of course, what happened? He got sick, and then he developed a taste aversion to the popcorn. So they can happen, taste aversions can happen different ways, but they always involve, some kind of illness and then just a negative association with that food. Here I've broken it down for you why a taste aversion is an example of classical conditioning. So I am using the example of meat contaminated with E. coli bacteria because we read about this happening all the time in the news. So how would it work? Normally the person eats the meat and they don't have any response. So that would be the preconditioning phase. However, during the conditioning phase, they now are eating contaminated meat. And then what goes along with that is nausea. They become ill. And then the result of that is they are now repulsed by meat. So then in the post-conditioning phase, now they see meat. It doesn't matter if it's contaminated or not, but in the absence of the nausea, they are still repulsed by meat. So that's why this is an example of classical conditioning. Now, one important thing that's unique to this specific example of classical conditioning compared with Pavlov's work with his dogs and Watson's work with little Albert is that these two stimuli do not have to be contiguous, meaning they do not have to occur at the same time in order for the conditioning to take place and the associations to form. In Pavlov's experiment, the bell and the food must be presented at the same time in order for the dog to learn that the bell indicates that food is coming. Same thing with Watson's work with little Albert. The white rat and the scary noise, they had to be presented contiguously at the same time or very close in time. Taste aversions, on the other hand, these two stimuli do not have to be presented contiguously because if you think about it, often, if you've ever had food poisoning, you eat the contaminated food, the nausea doesn't occur immediately because of course you have to digest that food. The nausea will usually occur after a little time has gone by, maybe a couple hours or something like that. And yet, even though these two stimuli are not presented contiguously, the association still forms. Why? Because in most cases, people can figure out what made them sick. They just use their common sense and they can figure out what food it was that made them sick. So because of that, the association still forms and they still end up being repulsed by that particular food and developing what's called a taste aversion. So just remember this specific type of classical conditioning that's called a taste aversion.